Happy Halloween, Planeswalkers. This is Eric from Bane Alley Magic, and this stormy night we bring you a deck tech on one of the game's most terrifying commanders, Purphoros, God of the Forge. But before we begin, I must remind you to like and subscribe, or I just might swallow your soul!
This is Purphoros, God of the Forge. 3 of anything and a red for a legendary enchantment creature god who is indestructible. As long as your devotion to red is less than 5, Purphoros isn't a creature. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, Purphoros deals 2 damage to each opponent. And if you pay 2 colorless and a red, creatures you control get +1/+0 to the end of the turn. And when Purphoros is a creature, he has power toughness 6/5. So devotion, if you don't know what devotion means, devotion refers to the casting cost in the creatures or permanents you have on the battlefield. So if the permanents you have on the battlefield have a total of 5 red color mana symbols in their casting cost, then your devotion to 5 makes Purphoros a creature. So the important thing here is obviously the ability where whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, Purphoros deals 2 damage to each opponent. So Purphoros is kind of a token deck, and it's a burn deck. And Purphoros is just terrifying. People know him by now. He's got a reputation. Anyone who's an experienced player is going to turn the whole table against you when you're playing Purphoros. So you got to have a little bit of a pillow fort in there as well, just because of that. And it's not a pillow fort deck, but there are a couple of cards which we are going to tutor up as quickly as possible, just because, man, people hate this guy. And in fact, the one card I'm missing from this deck would be Gamble, which is 1 red for a sorcery that lets you look for any card in your deck and put it into your hand. Then you have to discard a card at random. But that's the only card I'm missing really from here. I do have a couple of other ways to tutor up the sort of pillow fort, or the thing that prevents people from dealing damage to us, because that's really important. We're dealing damage to everybody. This is not a group hug deck. Everyone knows it, and they all can really easily team up on you as soon as you start dealing them 4, 6 damage each. Everyone's like, yeah, let's take care of this. Let's get rid of this guy. So Purphoros, fabulous commander, fabulous strategy, but you got to have those pillow fort things in there. Those things that prevent people from attacking you, or at least from dealing you damage. So Darksteel. Let's start with the lands. We got Darksteel Citadel, which is an artifact land that's indestructible, and it adds 1 colorless to your mana pool. But this is only to help one of our other tutors in the deck, which is Inventor's Fair, which is a legendary land that says at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 3 or more artifacts, you gain 1 life. So, this is an artifact, and it taps that a colorless to your mana pool, or you can pay 4 mana and tap and sacrifice Inventor's Fair. Then you get to search your library for an artifact card, reveal it, and put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. Activate this ability only if you control 3 or more artifacts. So the deck has a total of 20 artifacts, so hopefully we can get Inventor's Fair off if we can't find our kind of pillow forty things in other ways. But this is one way to find our piece that protects us. We got Haunted Fengraf, which is a land, I haven't tested this one out, it's a new edition, but I had room for extra utility lands, and this seems pretty cool. It adds a colorless, so you can pay 3 and sacrifice it, and return a creature card at random from your graveyard to your hand. So definitely worth considering in a deck that, has plenty of room for utility lands, because we're monocolored, obviously. We've got Handwear Battlements, which is a land that taps to add a colorless to your mana pool, or you can pay a red and tap it to give target creature haste until the end of the turn, or you can pay 3 mana and 3 of anything and 2 red and tap it. And if you both own and control Handwear Battlements and a creature named Handwear Garrison, exile them, then meld them into Handwear the Writhing Township. So I do have Handwear Garrison in this deck, actually, because it's kind of a token maker, which does support our strategy. I'll put this aside for now, and we'll we'll meld them together a little later in the video. Alright, continuing with the lands, we got Springjack Pasture, which is taps to add a colorless to your mana pool, where you can pay 4 and tap it and put a 0/1 goat token onto the battlefield, and you can tap it and sacrifice X goats to add X mana of any one color to your mana pool. You gain X life. So if all else fails, you can make some goats, hopefully deal some damage, or at least gain some life, and add plenty of mana to your mana pool. The card has potential, though it's not fabulous, but it's fun. It's a cool card. Get you some goats. Temple of the False God. Taps to add 2 colorless mana to your mana pool. Activate this ability only if you control 5 or more lands. I'm going to put this in every deck, actually, so I suggest you get some too. Spawning Bed. Taps to add a colorless mana to your mana pool, or you can pay 6, and tap it and sacrifice Spawning Bed. Put 3 1/1 colorless Eldrazi Scion creature tokens onto the battlefield. They have sacrificed this creature, add 1 colorless mana to your mana pool. Again, if you have Purphoros out, that means that those 3 tokens are going to be dealing 6 damage to each opponent. If that damage isn't doubled somehow to 12. Desert of the Fervent is the first of the cycling lands I got here. It's just a land that taps red, but you need cycling lands, I feel like, in almost every commander deck too. So cycling means you pay the mana, then you have to discard the card from your hand, and then draw a card. So if you already have enough mana, you can cycle this away and draw a different card. Very cool, very useful to have the cycling lands. We got Care Keep, which is another land that makes creature tokens, taps to add a colorless, or you can pay 1 and a red, tap it, and put a 0/1 red kobold creature token named Kobolds of Care Keep into play. Again, we don't really care about how big the tokens are. We just want to make as many tokens as possible so we can deal our opponents tons of damage. Here's another cycling land. This one you only got to pay 2 colorless mana. Smoldering Crater. You got Shivan Gorge, which is a legendary land. Taps out a colorless, or you can pay 2 mana and a red and tap it, and it deals 1 damage to each opponent. So a great way to finish off the game, or just to deal some extra damage to your opponents if you got the extra mana. Forgotten Cave is our last cycling land. You cycle it for 1 red mana, and you get to draw an extra card. So if you have too much mana, you can cycle away your cycling lands and get different cards. Valakut, the Molten Pinnacle, is a land that's surprisingly not legendary, but we're playing Commander, so that doesn't matter. But for all you 1v1 players, yeah, you can run 4 of these in your deck. It enters the battlefield tapped, and whenever a mountain enters the battlefield under your control, if you control at least 5 other mountains, you may have Valakut and the Molten Pinnacle deal 3 damage to target creature or player. And this can also tap to add a red to your mana. So yeah, this land is used in lots of combo decks. There's a green card, I forget what it's called, but it lets you sacrifice all your lands and then search your library for that many lands and put them all on the battlefield. And so people get this and a bunch of mountains, and they just deal tons of damage to the opponent's face. Very cool combo. This deck doesn't have that combo in it, but we're mono red, so we gotta include a Valakut and the Molten Pinnacle. We got plenty of mountains. So on to the mountains. We got plenty of them. In total, we have 37 lands. I think we have 22 mountains, or 24. Whatever, we got 37 lands. Now let's get on to the creatures. So we got Bomat Courier. They're kind of our first draw dork, got guy drawing us cards. For 1 mana, you get a 1/1 artifact creature construct with haste, and whenever Bomat Courier attacks, exile the top card of your library face down. And you can pay red, discard your hand, and sacrifice Bomat Courier to put all cards exiled with Bomat Courier into their owner's hands. So you basically get to replace your whole hand, and this gets better and better the less cards you have in your hand. Obviously, as long as this guy survives. There's a chance that it'll whiff, someone will destroy it, you don't get those cards, but man, if you just leave 1 red mana open, you're guaranteed to get those cards if you really need them. Iron Mirror is 2 generic for a 1/1 artifact creature mirror, and you tap it to add 1 red mana to your mana pool. It's funny that these older cards kind of have this like black and white looking red mana symbol on them. I don't know, it must be some kind of old misprint or something. It's interesting, but the card isn't obviously not. It's obviously not black and white, so that's just silly. Thopter Assembly is 6 mana for an artifact creature Thopter. That's a 5/5 flyer. And at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control no Thopters other than Thopter Assembly, return Thopter Assembly to its owner's hand and put 5 colorless Thopter artifact creature tokens with flying onto the battlefield. So this thing does huge amounts of damage with Purphoros. I mean, number one, it enters the battlefield, deals 2 damage to each opponent, and then at the beginning of your next upkeep, you return it to your hand, and then you get 5 more, which are going to deal 10 damage to each opponent. That's a total of 12 damage to each opponent, and then you can, you know, cast Thopter Assembly again, and then get another 2 damage. Yeah, so that's a total of 14 damage you can get as long as you got the mana over the course of 2 turns. But this is perfect for our deck, and really cool artwork too. Yeah, check out that artwork. It's kind of a really sweet Thopter monster. Alright, Hangerback Walker is an XX creature. It enters the battlefield with X 1/1 counters on it, so you gotta pay, you know, X. So for example, if you paid only 2 mana, this would be a 1/1. And when Hangerback Walker dies, put a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature token with flying onto the battlefield for each +1/+1 counter on Hangerback Walker. And you can pay 1 and tap it to put a +1/+1 counter on Hangerback Walker. So this guy can get bigger. You can cast him later in the game and just make him huge. And when he dies, you get tons of little 1/1 colorless Thopters. And, you know, if you need a mana sink, if you have extra mana, you can put an additional +1/+1 counter on him and just ensure that you're going to get more 1/1s. Of course, if they exile him, this isn't going to work. Mirror Battlesphere is 7 mana for an artifact creature mirror construct. As you can see, we got lots of artifacts, but only a total of 20 in the whole deck. It's a 4/7, and when Mirror Battlesphere enters the battlefield, put 4 1/1 colorless mirror artifact creature tokens onto the battlefield. Whenever Mirror Battlesphere attacks, you may tap X untap mirror you control. If you do, Mirror Battlesphere gets +X/+0 until the end of the turn and deals X damage to the defending player. So that extra X damage at the very end is something you might forget if you're not reading the whole paragraph here, so remember that. You get to deal also just an extra additional X damage to the defending player no matter what. That's huge. So also just perfect for any burn deck. You know, any deck that's relying on burn, even if you're, you know, not relying on artifacts such as just Mirror Battlesphere. Really cool card. Of course, when it enters the battlefield, you get 4 tokens, so that's going to be a total of 5 creatures entering the battlefield, and with Purphoros, that's 10 damage to each opponent. Pentavis, 7 mana for a 0/0, but it enters the battlefield with 5 +1/+1 counters on it. And you can pay 1 to remove a +1/+1 counter from Pentavis to put a 1/1 colorless Pentavite artifact creature token with flying onto the battlefield. And his next ability is you can pay 1 and sacrifice a Pentavite and put a +1/+1 counter back on Pentavis. So with Purphoros out, basically, for 2 mana, you get to create and sacrifice a creature token, and that's going to deal 2 damage to each opponent. So for each 2 mana you got, you're going to deal 2 damage to each opponent. That's huge. That can end the game very quickly. Cool combo piece with Purphoros. Next we got Combustible Gearhulk, mostly because we just need cards that draw us cards, and, you know, we also want to combine that with some more burn just to finish the game out quickly, because like I said, our opponents are going to try to kill us as quickly as possible, so we need to kill them as quickly as possible. Games with Purphoros are always short games, but you know, I like them, they're fun. I love Purphoros, he's one of my favorite commanders. 6/6 Artifact Creature Construct for 4 generic and 2 red, and when combustible, it has first strike also, that's important, and when Combustible Gearhulk enters the battlefield, target opponent may have you draw 3 cards. If that player doesn't, put the top 3 cards of your library into your graveyard, then Combustible Gearhulk deals damage to that player equal to the total converted mana cost of those cards. And so you have to just be sure, you got to read people's poker face, and you got to decide, you know, who's going to let me draw those cards. You know, it's not about as much as dealing the damage, even though, you know, you might want to deal them the damage, that's cool too, but you really want to draw the cards often is what you want to do. So you want to pick the person who you feel like the most isn't going to want to take that damage, usually whoever has the lowest life. Alright, next we got Mad Prophet. This is a guy that just, you know, mostly just draws us cards. So 3 generic and a red for a human shaman, a 2/2 with haste, and it has tap to discard a card and then draw a card. This goes in a lot of my red decks, actually, just as a great little draw card trigger. You know, every turn you can discard a card to draw a card, and you can do it right away for just 4 mana. So pretty cool creature. Also deals 2 damage to each opponent if Purphoros is out when he enters the battlefield. Next we got Neheb the Eternal for some more ramp. 3 generic and 2 red for a legendary creature, zombie, minotaur, warrior. Lots of creature types here. Afflict 3. Whenever this creature becomes blocked, defending player loses 3 life. Yeah, just no matter what, they're going to lose 3 life. And then at the beginning of your post-combat main phase, meaning the main phase after combat, if you don't know, add red to your mana pool for each 1 life your opponents have lost this turn. So if he deals them the 4 damage from combat damage, you're going to be adding 4 red mana to your mana pool. If they block them, they're going to be adding 3. You're going to be adding 3 red mana to your mana pool. And with Purphoros out, you can be dealing them tons of damage and getting tons of mana to your mana pool. So very cool, very rampy card. Emrakul's Hatcher is next for 4 generic and a red. It's a 3/3 Eldrazi drone, and when Emrakul's Hatcher enters the battlefield, put 3 0/1 colorless Eldrazi spawn creature tokens onto the battlefield. They have sacrificed this creature to add 1 colorless mana to your mana pool. So we got mana ramp, and we got plenty of damage happening with Purphoros, a total of 8 damage here. Direfleet Daredevil is 1 generic and a red for a human pirate. That's a 2/1 first strike, and when Direfleet Daredevil enters the battlefield, exile target instant or sorcery card from an opponent's graveyard. You may cast that card this turn, and you may spend mana as though it were any type to cast that spell. If that card would be put into a graveyard this turn, exile it instead. So you get to cast something from any opponent's graveyard. This gives, better later on in the game, obviously, but it's basically a little more card advantage, which this deck needs, and hopefully your opponents have pretty full graveyards. Hanweir Garrison. Alright, so this is the one that melds with Hanweir Battlements. Whenever Hanweir Garrison attacks, put 2 1/1 red creature tokens onto the battlefield tapped and attacking. So that really synergizes with Purphoros, getting 2 creatures on the battlefield every turn, dealing your opponents 4 damage every turn on top of the 2 damage that Hanweir Garrison dealt when he entered the battlefield. There's lots of he's and she's in the Garrison, I'm sure. And so also I failed to mention that Hanweir Garrison is 2 generic and a red for a 2/3 human soldier. And it melds with the land, Hanweir Battlements, and let's just take a look what they meld into. Hello, Siege Gang Commander. Alright. They meld into Hanweir, the Writhing Township. And it's a legendary creature, Eldrazi Ooze, which is a 7/4 trample haste, and whenever Hanweir, the Writhing Township, attacks, put 2 3/2 colorless Eldrazi horror creature tokens onto the battlefield, tapped and attacking. So again, getting us creature tokens, synergizing with Purphoros, getting more and more creatures, and I should say right now that Purphoros is mostly about dealing your opponents that damage. I mean, even attacking with the creatures and dealing combat damage is really secondary in this deck. It's all about that enter the battlefield effect from Purphoros. Super cool. So just sleeve this up again. Sleeve you up, sir. Okay. Continuing onto Siege Gang Commander, 3 generic and 2 red for a 2/2 goblin. And when Siege Gang Commander comes into play, enters the battlefield, put 3 1/1 red goblin creature tokens onto the battlefield. And for 1 and a red, you can sacrifice a goblin, and Siege Gang Commander deals 2 damage to target creature or player. So he deals extra damage by sacrificing goblins, and he's going to deal a total of 8 damage when he enters the battlefield if Purphoros is out. Beetleback Chief is 2 generic and 2 red for a 2/2 goblin warrior, and when Beetleback Chief enters the battlefield, put 2 1/1 red goblin creature tokens onto the battlefield. So with Purphoros out, this is going to deal a total of 6 damage to your opponents. And, back to Purphoros, real quick. I do believe in this deck you generally want to have your devotion below 5. Even though you get these creatures that I'm telling you a lot about. The one way to protect him is to kind of, do other things, try to combo off, but it doesn't entirely matter because he's still always indestructible, but it's a lot harder for your opponents to deal with Purphoros when he's not a creature. You know, when he's just in a legendary enchantment, you know, a lot harder for your opponents to deal with and to target. Alright, so our next creature is Krenko Mob Boss. 2 generic and 2 red for a legendary creature Goblin Warrior. He's a 3/3 and he has tap to put X 1/1 red goblin creature tokens onto the battlefield, where X is the number of goblins you control. So this deck can generate a lot of goblins. You might have noticed we got CJ and Commander, we got Beetleback Chief, we got this guy himself who can just start the combo all by himself, and he's going to get you lots of 1/1 red goblin tokens, dealing potentially lots and lots of damage. And this is also another commander. If you have Krenko as your commander, I suggest putting Purphoros in that deck, absolutely. Grinning Ignis is 2 generic and a red for a 2/2 elemental, and it has pay a red to return Grinning Ignis to its owner's hand, and you also add 2 generic and 2 red to your mana pool. Activate this ability only anytime you could cast a sorcery. So this is interesting. I had a game recently where I had the Ruby Medallion out, which made all my red creatures 1 less to cast, and I had Grinning Ignis out, and I had Purphoros out, and it wasn't an infinite combo, but man, I was dealing everyone tons of damage, just paying 1 red to return Grinning Ignis to my hand, but then recasting Grinning Ignis only cost me 2 mana total because of the Ruby Medallion, and so with that 3 mana I generated, I only had to use 2 of it to cast him, so I was generating an extra 1 colorless mana every time I was doing it. Unfortunately, it wasn't infinite, you know, but it was pretty sweet. Guy works really well. Kazul, Tyrant of the Cliffs, is part of our little Pillowfort strategy. It says, well, first off, it's a 3 generic and 2 red for a 5/4 legendary Ogre Warrior. And whenever a creature an opponent controls attacks, if you're the defending player, put a 3/3 red Ogre creature token onto the battlefield, unless that creature's controller pays 3 colorless mana. Or 3 generic mana. So, this guy can get you more creature tokens, it it makes your opponents think twice before attacking you. They gotta pay 3 mana, or you're gonna get another token that's gonna deal them all another 2 damage as long as Purphoros is out. Legion War Boss is 2 generic and a red for a 2/2 Goblin Soldier. This is a new card from the Guilds of Ravnica set. It has Mentor. Whenever this creature attacks, put a 1/1 counter on target attacking creature with lesser power. And at the beginning of your upkeep, at the beginning of combat on your turn, create a creature with lesser power that happens to be a 1/1 red goblin creature token, and that token gains haste until the end of the turn, so it can attack right away, and it has to attack this combat if able. So that 1/1 red token is going to become a 2/2 token that has to attack, and so Legion War Boss is just going to be pumping out goblins and dealing tons of damage with Purphoros. Mog War Marshal, same thing. When Mog War Marshal enters the battlefield or dies, put a 1/1 red goblin creature token onto the battlefield. So it's a 1/1 goblin for 2 mana, and it also has Echo, which means at the beginning of your upkeep, if it came under your control since the beginning of your last upkeep, you have to sacrifice it unless you pay its Echo cost, which is 2 mana. But this is at least going to get you 2 1/1 red goblin creature tokens on the battlefield if you don't pay its Echo cost. And if you do pay its Echo cost, you're going to have a total of 3 1/1s on the battlefield. But more importantly, no matter what, Purphoros is going to be dealing your opponents 6 damage with Mog War Marshal. Yeah. Purphoros, when it enters the battlefield, when this guy enters the battlefield, it's going to deal them 2 damage, and then it's also going to get a 1/1 red goblin creature token, which is going to deal the number 2 damage, and then at the beginning of your upkeep, you don't pay the Echo cost and you sacrifice him, and then it's going to get you another 1/1 red goblin creature token, which is 6 damage, yeah, for just 2 mana. That's pretty sweet. Norin the Wary is 1 red for a 2/1 legendary human warrior, and whenever a player plays a spell or a creature attacks, remove Norin the Wary from the game. Return it to play under its owner's control at the end of turn. I've actually seen people use this as their commander, which is hilarious, but whenever they do, they have to include Purphoros in their deck. That's the combo. This guy, he kind of never goes away. The only way to get rid of Norin the Wary is with an activated ability. Maybe, or perhaps a triggered ability, I guess. But yeah, he can't die from combat damage or from playing a spell, or maybe he can counter his ability with some blue spell that counters target triggered ability. So this guy is just going to keep flipping out and flipping back in and dealing 2 damage with Purphoros basically every single turn. Yeah. Okay, I don't know what that was about, but it looks like we can continue. Okay, so we got Rekindling Phoenix next. 2 generic and 2 red for a 4/3 Phoenix with flying, and when Rekindling Phoenix dies, create a 0/1 red elemental creature token with, at the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice this creature and return target card named Rekindling Phoenix from your graveyard to the battlefield. It gains haste until the end of the turn. So this comes out, it deals 2 damage. Maybe it flies at the opponent's face, deals them 4 damage, and then when it dies, it creates a 0/1 token, which with Purphoros is going to deal your opponents another 2 damage. And then at the beginning of your upkeep, that token is going to get sacrificed, and you get Rekindling Phoenix back, which again is going to deal your opponents 2 damage with Purphoros, and hopefully swing at their faces for another 4 damage. Super cool. Great synergy with Purphoros. All right, now on to the non-creature spells. So we got Risk Factor, which is the first of our draw card package. That's not creatures. And 2 generic and a red for an instant. Target opponent may have Risk Factor deal 4 damage to them. If that player doesn't, you draw 3 cards. And it also has Jumpstart, and that means you may cast this card from your graveyard by discarding a card in addition to paying its other costs, then exile this card. So you get to do this up to 2 times potentially, and if you don't draw the cards, then your opponents are going to be taking 4 damage each time. And that's what we want in this deck. We want things that are going to basically force our opponents to let us draw the cards, because they're already taking so much damage from Purphoros. They're not going to want to draw the cards. So same thing, we want to choose the right opponent, make sure that they're... Alright, so next on our cards that draw us more cards, we got Shaundra Flamecaller, the first of our Planeswalkers in the deck. 4 generic and 2 red for a Shaundra Planeswalker that enters with 4 loyalty counters. For +1, you put 2 3/1 red elemental creature tokens with haste onto the battlefield and exile them at the beginning of the next end step. For 0, you discard all cards in your hand, then draw that many cards +1. And for -X, Shaundra deals X damage to each creature. So the +1 ability is going to help out with Purphoros, deal damage with the 3/1 haste elementals, as well as dealing the 2 damage with Purphoros, which is going to be actually 4 damage because there's 2 creatures. Also, the 0 ability is what we're mainly including this card for, though, because we need draw cards, so this fills kind of both slots, but that's why it's in the draw card section of the deck. Vance's Blasting Cannons is 3 generic and a red for a legendary enchantment. It doesn't exactly draw you a card, it kind of gives you the option of casting the top card of your library. So at the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top card of your library. If it's a non-land card, you may cast that card this turn. Whenever you cast your 3rd spell in a turn, you may transform Vance's Blasting Cannons into a land that either lets you make 1 red mana, or you can pay 4 mana and tap it to deal 3 damage to target creature or player. So that's pretty cool. But mostly it's in the deck because at the beginning of your upkeep, you exile the top card of your library, and you get to cast that card if you want. So if you want to see the other side, it's Spitfire Bastion, and I was wrong, it's only 2 generic and a red, and you tap it and it deals 3 damage to target creature or player, so definitely not bad on the other side either. So on the other side, it sort of turns into ramp because it gives you an extra land, but it starts out as draw, so cool card in almost any red deck. Next we got Apex of Power, 7 generic and 3 red, so 10 mana total, but you get to, for a sorcery, and you get to exile the top 7 cards of your library. Until the end of the turn, you may cast non-land cards exiled this way, and if this spell was cast from your hand, you add 10 mana of any one color to your mana pool. So it's like, if you have the 10 mana, it's a free spell. You cast it, and then you add 10 mana to your mana pool of red, and then you get to cast any of the top 7 cards of your library. This spell is so huge and powerful. Very great in this deck. Next we got our next Planeswalker, Shaundra, Torch of Defiance, 2 generic and 2 red. For a Planeswalker, Shaundra also enters with 4 loyalty counters, and it has 2 different +1 abilities. You can either +1 to exile the top card of your library, and you may cast that card. If you don't, Shaundra, Torch of Defiance deals 2 damage to each opponent, or you could +1 to add 2 red mana to your mana pool. So the first +1 ability is, huge. It's basically drawing us cards. That's mainly why this is in here, but this also has the second ability of adding mana to your mana pool. Drawing cards and adding mana is how we play the game, so it's very important for the deck. You can also -3 to have it deal 4 damage to target creature. Removal is very important to the game, so this is such a great card. I've never got the emblem, but if you -7, you get an emblem with whenever you cast a spell, this emblem deals 5 damage to target creature or player. Yeah, that'd be amazing. Next, we got Staff of Nin. For 6 generic mana, you get an artifact. At the beginning of your upkeep, draw a card, and you can tap it to deal 1 damage to target creature or player. Very cool card in any deck that needs help drawing extra cards. Skull Clamp goes in any token strategy. 1 generic mana for an artifact, and it has Equip 1. This equipment gives the equipped creature +1/-1, and whenever the equipped creature dies, you get to draw 2 cards. So once this is out, you're basically playing 1 mana, equipping one of your tokens, and that token dies, and you just draw 2 cards for 1 mana. That's just huge. Amazing card in Commander. Next we have Soul Ring. 1 generic mana for the artifact that everyone knows what it does. If you don't, get out of here. What are you doing? Ruby Medallion is next. We talked about this earlier. It's 2 generic mana for an artifact. It says red spells you cast cost 1 generic mana less to cast. So this, is one of the better types of mono rocks. If you're playing multiple colors, like 5 colors, I wouldn't recommend the medallions. But if you're playing 2, maybe 3 colors, I definitely recommend running the medallions. They give all of your spells of that color 1 less to cast. So it's not like another mono rock where you just tap it and you get to you get to add 1 to your mana pool and that's it. It's literally every spell you're casting that turn is less to cast, which is huge. Gets you lots of extra mana left over. Next we have Pyromonster's Goggles. 5 generic for a legendary artifact. You tap it to add 1 red mana to your mana pool. When that mana is spent to cast a red instant or sorcery spell, you copy that spell and you may choose new targets for the copies. So as you'll see soon, we got lots of instants and sorceries that make creatures, and so as long as you can cast those spells with Pyromancer's Goggles, you're going to get twice that many creatures on the battlefield, making Purphoros activate or trigger that twice that many times. Super great in this burn deck. Ashnod's Altar is 3 generic for an artifact. You sacrifice a creature to add 2 colorless mana to your mana pool. Play this ability as an interrupt. So this is an older version of the card, obviously, but you can sacrifice the creatures at instant speed. You don't need to pay any mana to do it, and you can do it as many times as you want in the turn. And the combo piece with this is Nim Death Metal, which is also in the deck, coming up soon. I'll explain how that combo works a little later. But first, we got to talk about Expedition Map. This is 1 generic for an artifact. It says pay 2 mana, tap it, sacrifice Expedition Map, search your library for a land card, reveal it, and put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. So this is used to tutor for the very important Pillow Fort piece in the deck, which I've been talking about for so long, but no one knows what it is. It is, what do you know, Glacial Chasm. It's a card that's going in lots of my decks, you may realize, and it's a card that I recommend for anyone that's playing a deck that they even suspect is just going to draw hate. If you think your deck is going to get attacked by everyone else and everyone else is ganging up on you, then play a Glacial Chasm, man. And if you're playing a Glacial Chasm, you also need to play Expedition Map to help you search for Glacial Chasm, because there are almost no cards outside of green that let you just search for any kind of land. They always let you search for a basic land, right? But this lets you search for any kind of land and put it into your hand, though you have to reveal it. Glacial Chasm says cumulative upkeep 2 life. That means the turn after you play this, during your upkeep, you have to pay 2 life. And then the next upkeep after that, you're going to pay 4 life. Your next upkeep, that is. And then your next upkeep after that, you're going to pay 6 life, and so on. It just keeps adding on 2 more life every time. And it says when Glacial Chasm comes into play, you have to sacrifice a land. Right? 2 big downsides, but the upside is, third downside, you cannot attack. All right? But that doesn't really matter as much with our deck, because we're dealing damage to our opponent's faces directly with Purphoros, not as much through combat damage. And the important thing here, it says all damage dealt to you is reduced to 0. So you can imagine, even if you have 3 opponents, if all 3 of them are attacking you every turn, even if you're taking 6 damage from Glacial Chasm, and even if you're taking 8 damage from Glacial Chasm, that's often way less than what you're going to be taking with everyone else just attacking you with all your creatures every turn when they're all ganging up on you because you're playing bloody Purphoros, right? And this is why we include Inventor's Fair, because like I said, there's not a lot of ways to tutor up a land specifically, but this can tutor up Expedition Map, which will tutor up Glacial Chasm. Or if we already have Glacial Chasm, we can tutor up something else with Inventor's Fair, because like I said, we have like 20 other artifacts. But that's also why I want to include Gamble in the deck, to just search for probably Expedition Map on the chance that I might discard it with Gamble. But yeah, we want ways to look for Glacial Chasm in the Purphoros deck, 100%, because everyone is terrified of us. You know that. Everyone is horrified of the Purphoros deck. Absolutely. So, continuing. We have Dictate of the Twin Gods, 3 generic and 2 red for an enchantment, and it has flash, so you can cast this at instant speed. You want to cast this at the end of your opponent's turn because of what it does. If any source would deal a damage to any permanent or any player, it deals double that damage to that permanent or player instead. So all damage is doubled in the whole game, and playing this will often kill you, because like I said, everyone hates you, everyone's attacking you, so you want to get Glacial Chasm out first, 100%, before you play Dictate of the Twin Gods, or you just want to make sure that you're about to, combo off and just win the game before you play Dictate of the Twin Gods, because everyone's going to be using this to their advantage and just attacking you. So, Dictate of the Twin Gods is really good, and so is Gratuitous Violence. Unfortunately, with Gratuitous Violence, you need Purphoros' Devotion to red to be 5 or more. But, honestly, that's not hard to do with Gratuitous Violence out itself, because that has 3 devotion right on it. So this is 2 generic and 3 red mana to cast. With Purphoros out, you have 4 devotion, so all you need is 1 more permanent with a red in their casting cost, and this is going to activate with Purphoros, because it says if a creature you control would deal damage to a creature or player, it deals double that damage to that creature or player instead. And again, Purphoros isn't a creature until you have devotion 5 or more. So, but Gratuitous Violence is going to double up all that damage. The reason I chose it over a couple of other options, such as Furnace of Wrath, or maybe Insult, Injury, is just because this one only affects you. That's the great thing here. It's not going to make your opponents deal double damage. It's only your things are going to deal double damage here. So, super cool card. Next we have Conjurer's Closet, and this is an artifact for 5 mana, and it says at the beginning of your end step, you may exile target creature you control, then return that card to the battlefield under your control. So why would we want to do this? Well, for one, it's going to make Purphoros trigger again every time the creature returns on the battlefield under our control. But number 2, lots of our creatures, as you noticed, when they enter the battlefield, make more creatures, such as, Siege Gang Commander. So this is going to get many more triggers off of Purphoros, as is Panharmonicon. If an artifact, 4 generic mana, and it says, if an artifact or creature entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. So all of Purphoros' trigger are going to trigger an additional time. All of our creatures that enter the battlefield, if they enter the battlefield and make tokens, they're going to make twice that many tokens, which is going to make Purphoros trigger again. And again, Purphoros is now going to be dealing 4 damage every time a creature enters the battlefield under your control. Stupid good. Definitely essential in this deck. And again, if you already have Glacial Chasm, or if you're not worried about combat damage, you can tutor up this with the Inventor's Fair. Get that Panharmonicon out. It's a great choice for the Inventor's Fair. Next we got Blade of Selves, 2 generic mana for an equipment, and has equipped 4, and it says equipped creature has Myriad. And whenever equipped creature attacks, for each opponent other than the defending player, you may put a token that's a copy of that creature onto the battlefield, tapped and attacking that player, or a planeswalker he or she controls. Exile the tokens at the end of the combat. So this is huge in this deck. You attack with 1 creature that's not legendary, which we have many, and you get 2 more copies of that creature entering the battlefield, because you have a total of 3 opponents, and so those 2 copies are going to make Purphoros trigger again. But more importantly, like I said, we have plenty of creatures that enter the battlefield and make tokens, right? So when the Myriad tokens enter the battlefield, those tokens are going to make more tokens as long as the equipped creature makes tokens when it enters the battlefield, and all of those tokens are going to make Purphoros trigger. So just imagine putting this on Siege Gang Commander, right? Which makes a couple of goblins when it enters the battlefield. Excuse me. So, oh man, I have another one coming up soon. So, When the copies of Siege Gang Commander enter the battlefield with this Myriad trigger, those copies are also going to make extra Goblin tokens when they enter the battlefield. So, super powerful card in this deck, definitely an essential. Next we have Nim Death Metal, 2 generic for an equipment, and it says equipped creature gets +2/+2, has Intimidate, and is a black zombie. And whenever a non-token creature is put into your graveyard from the battlefield, you may pay 4 mana. If you do, return that card to the battlefield and attach Nim Death Metal to it, and has equipped 4. So let me just gather one of the creatures out. I've been talking about them many times, but hold on a second. Yeah, here we go. Just to show you how this works, let's do it with Beetleblack Chief. Okay, so combo with Ashnod's Altar, and any creature that makes tokens, creature tokens when it enters or leaves the battlefield. So Beetleblack Chief. When Beetleblack Chief enters the battlefield, put 2 1/1 red goblin creature tokens on the battlefield. So again, with Blade of Selves, that's pretty powerful. Another one of those creatures. Anyway, so what you do if you have all these on the battlefield is you sacrifice the Beetleblack Chief and one of the goblin creature tokens to Ashnod's Altar. That's going to give you 4 colorless mana to your mana pool. And then you can pay that 4 mana to put it into Nim Death Mantle. And when this creature is put into the graveyard, you pay the 4 mana and return that card from the battlefield. Return that card to the battlefield and attach Nim Death Mantle to it. So this comes back again, and you get 2 more Goblin creature tokens. And with the 1 creature token left over from before, you have a total now of 3 Goblin creature tokens. And then you just do this over and over again, each time netting an extra Goblin token each time, and you can make an infinite amount of tokens. And with Purphoros out, you just deal an infinite amount of damage to your opponents and just win the game. But this combo with Nim Death Mantle and Ashnod's Altar can be put into any commander deck. Absolutely any commander deck, because in all colors there are creatures, even in colorless, there are creatures that enter the battlefield and make more creatures, or when they leave the battlefield they make more creatures. So yeah, that combo can kind of go in any deck, but it really fits the Purphoros deck obviously, because now we're dealing damage to our opponents every time it happens as well. Alright, our next Planeswalker, Coff of the Hammer, 2 generic and 2 red. For Planeswalker Coff, enters with 3 loyalty counters, and it has +1, untap target mountain. It becomes a 4/4 red elemental creature token until the end, or red elemental creature until the end of the turn. It's still a land. And for -2, you add a red to your mana pool for each mountain you control. And -5, you get an emblem with mountains you control have tap. This land deals 1 damage to target creature or player. So often I'm using the -2 ability more on this than anything else, just to add tons of mana to my mana pool so I can cast lots of things. But yeah, getting that emblem is super, just a great ability as well. But I feel like, yeah, the -2 ability is definitely what comes into play more often than anything else on Coff. Next we have Wild Ricochet, 2 generic and 2 red for an instant, and it says you may choose new targets for target instant or sorcery spell, then copy that spell, and you may choose new targets for the copies. This is one of the more powerful red cards I feel like in the whole game, because, let's say someone wants to destroy your creature with, I don't know, a Doomblade, right? And so they target your target your, I don't know, your Beetleblack Chief, right, with Doomblade, and you say, all right, you cast Wild Ricochet, and you instead target their commander with Doomblade, and you get to copy Doomblade and choose new targets for the copy, so you kill another one of their creatures. Yeah, very cool. Also works great if anyone's trying to take extra turns with certain spells. You get to take the extra turn instead. Yeah, very cool. Next we got Bloodmoon, 2 generic and a red for an enchantment. It says non-basic lands or mountains. This goes in any deck that's red because it absolutely ruins your opponents, especially in Commander, where probably 90% of the players are going to be running non-basic lands. Or, 100% are going to run non-basic lands, but 90% are going to be depending on their non-basic lands. And yeah, red is kind of the most useless color for them to gain. Very powerful, very disruptive card. Put it in any red deck you got, absolutely. Next we got Impact Tremors, 1 generic and a red for an enchantment. It says whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, Impact Tremors deals 1 damage to each opponent. So it's a mini Purphoros, right? Instead of dealing 1, instead of dealing 2, it deals 1. When you got both out, you're going to be dealing 3 damage to each opponent. When you have Panharmonicon out, excuse me, you're going to be doubling these triggers. So Impact Tremors will be dealing 2, Purphoros will be dealing 4. If you have Panharmonicon, Impact Tremors, and Purphoros out, you're going to be dealing 6 damage to each opponent every time a creature enters the battlefield under your control. That's just huge. Leyline of Punishment is 2 generic and 2 red for an enchantment. If Leyline of Punishment is in your opening hand, you may begin the game with it on the battlefield. Players can't gain life, and damage can't be prevented. So this is exactly what you want, because often, I've seen people playing, the Soul Sisters and things, and that way, whenever a creature enters the battlefield, they're gaining 1 life. So they're kind of negating Purphoros' ability if they can get enough of those creatures out. So this just makes sure that no one's gaining life, no one can come back from the Purphoros damage, and you can potentially, get this on the game turn 1. Very cool. Alright, next we got Volcanic Vision, 5 generic and 2 red for a sorcery. It says return target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand, and Volcanic Vision deals damage equal to that card's converted mana cost to each creature your opponents control, and then you have to exile Volcanic Vision. So this is a board wipe, which many people fail to realize. They just read the first part, but yeah, it deals damage equal to that card's converted mana cost to each creature your opponents control. So your creatures end up okay, and you just end up killing everyone else's creatures. Yeah, and this gets us into the oh, not the board wipes yet. I thought this started the board wipes, but now we got some more. Now we got some spells that make creature tokens. Yeah, so we got Goblin Rally, 3 generic and 2 red for sorcery, and says put 4 1/1 red goblin creature tokens onto the battlefield. Then you have Pyromancer's Goggles out, then you're going to get to double the spell, and you get 8 1/1 red goblin creature tokens. That's going to be 16 damage with Purphoros. I mean, the possibilities are endless here, so I'm going to stop listing them and continue. We got Tempt with Vengeance. This is a tempting offer no one's going to take but you, unless they got that bloody Soul Sisters deck. So X and a red for a sorcery. It says put X 1/1 red elemental creature tokens with haste onto the battlefield. Each opponent may put X 1/1 red elemental creature tokens with haste on the battlefield. For each player who does, put X 1/1 red elemental creature tokens with haste on the battlefield. So you can, get so many 1/1 red elemental creature tokens actually from that Soul Sister deck, because they're going to want to gain that life, and they're going to want to, get those creature tokens, and it's just going to end up killing the other 2 opponents. Yeah, so very useful. Most of the time, though, it's just going to be you getting those creature tokens, but obviously this fits the theme of our deck perfectly. We just want to make tons of tokens. Pump all your mana into Tempted Vengeance. Alright, next we got Devil's Playground. It's 4 generic and 2 red for a sorcery. It says put 4 1/1 red devil creature tokens onto the battlefield, and they have, when this creature dies, it deals 1 damage to target creature or player. So not only are they dealing damage when they enter the battlefield, with Purphoros they're going to deal damage when they leave the battlefield as well. Next we have Hordling Outburst, 1 generic and 2 red for a sorcery. Put 3 1/1 red goblin creature tokens on the battlefield, and with Purphoros that's going to deal 6 damage to each opponent. Dance with Devils is 3 generic and a red for an instant. Put 2 1/1 red devil creature tokens onto the battlefield. They have, when this creature dies, it deals 1 damage to target creature or player, and that's going to be 4 damage with Purphoros. Next we have Mog Infestation. This is one of the kind of win conditions of the deck here. 3 generic and 2 red for a sorcery. Destroy all creatures target player controls. For each creature put into any graveyard this way, put 2 goblin creature tokens into play under that player's control. Treat these tokens as 1/1 red creatures. Obviously an old card. This basically says destroy all creatures someone controls. For each creature destroyed this way, that player gets a 1/1 red goblin creature token. And so you use this on yourself. You destroy all your creatures, and you basically get that many 1/1 red goblins back, which is just going to be plenty of more creatures entering the battlefield and triggering Purphoros all over again. And Mog Infestation on steroids is Descent of the Dragons, 4 generic and 2 red, sorcery. Destroy any number of target creatures. For each creature destroyed this way, its controller puts a 4/4 red dragon creature token on the battlefield with flying. So yeah, you destroy all your creatures and you replace them all with 4/4 red dragons, and you also have the upside of potentially, destroying any threats your opponents may have, because this is any number of target creatures can be targeted, even your opponent's creatures. And so if a 4/4 dragon is better than having, I don't know, their commander, then give them a 4/4 dragon, right? Yeah. Okay. Next we got the removal spells. Ratchet Bomb, 2 generic for an artifact. You can tap it to put a charge counter on it, or you can tap it and sacrifice it. Destroy each non-land permanent with converted mana cost equal to the number of charge counters on Ratchet Bomb. So this is Red's way of dealing with enchantments, which it doesn't have many. It needs artifacts most of the time to deal with enchantments. And this will also, if you have no charge counters on it, you can destroy all the creature tokens on the battlefield if your opponent's playing a token deck. Or this can just destroy lots of things. I mean, potentially many, many things. It's also going to destroy your things, but lots of time, that's exactly what we need. And again, this is probably one of the easier way for red to deal with enchantments. Star of Extinction is 5 generic and 2 red for a sorcery. It says destroy target land, and Star of Extinction deals 20 damage to each creature and each planeswalker. So you blow up all your opponent's planeswalkers and kill all of their creatures. I mean, pretty much nothing's going to survive if it's not indestructible. And you get to destroy a land. I mean, that's great. I was going to put an Anger of the Gods, but, the upside of getting to destroy a land as well is just too huge. And, getting to 7 mana is not that hard to do. Alright, next we got Chaos Warp, kind of red color spells only way to deal with enchantments as far as red spells goes. So we got 2 generic and a red, and it's an instant, which is very important, and the owner of target permanent shuffles it into his or her library, then reveals the top card of his or her library. If that card's a permanent, he or she puts it onto the battlefield. So this can target anything, lands, enchantments, planeswalkers, artifacts, creatures, and it has the potential of getting another permanent back, but the odds are in your favor that that permanent isn't going to be as threatening as the permanent you're choosing to get rid of. Though, maybe. Alright, By Force is next. For X and a red, you destroy X target artifacts. Sorcery speed, perfect. It's just what we need, If somebody's got troublesome artifacts, we get to destroy them, and pretty much everyone in Commander is running some form of artifact. They at least have Soul Ring. Alright, next we have Arc Bond. It's an instant. For 2 generic and a red, it says choose target creature. Whenever that creature is dealt damage this turn, it deals that much damage to each other creature and each player. Yeah, that's just huge. If they're attacking you with a 10-10, you block it with your 1-1, but then you also cast Arc Bond, and that's going to deal 10 damage to each opponent and each creature. Yeah, so big board wipe, big burn spell, big earthquake kind of. And speaking of which, here we got Earthquake. X and a red. Earthquake deals X damage to each creature without flying and each player at sorcery speed. This is probably, your way to win the game. You got all your opponents really down on life, and then you cast this and end them off. So we love the burn spells in the burn deck. Next we got Blasphemous Act. 8 generic and a red for a sorcery. Blasphemous Act costs 1 less to cast for each creature on the battlefield, and it deals 13 damage to each creature. So this is almost a guaranteed way of blowing up every single creature on the battlefield that's not indestructible for potentially 1 mana. I mean, if there's 8 creatures on the battlefield, you only have to pay 1 mana to cast Blasphemous Act. That is fabulous. Next we have Fiery Confluence, 2 generic and 2 red for a sorcery, and you get to choose 3. You may choose the same mode more than once. So either Fiery Confluence deals 1 damage to each creature, or Fiery Confluence deals 2 damage to each opponent, or destroy target artifacts. So you can blow up 3 artifacts that are troublesome, or you can do any combination of these things. The Confluence cards are great. They're in each color. I suggest looking into them and considering them for your decks. Absolutely. Burn, burn, burn. Next we got Vandal Blast. Destroy target artifact you don't control for 1 red mana, sorcery speed, or you can overload this for 5 mana, and you may cast this card for its overload cost. If you do, change its text by replacing all instances of target with each. So instead it's going to say destroy each artifact you don't control. Very cool for just 5 mana. And with Valakut, that means we're at the end of the deck list, so I hope you enjoyed the video. Please like and subscribe, and most of all, let me know what you think. Leave some comments in the comment section. So this is Eric from Bane Alley Magic signing off. Until next time, take care, take it easy, and happy Halloween.